Hey, welcome to Rainier View. My name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here, and we are talking this morning about this theme of uncharted. How do we take the good news into a very uncertain world? And it's got me thinking because a friend gave me a book called Canoeing the Mountains, and it chronicled the journey really of Lewis and Clark and their initial call to be part of this core discovery, and the initial kind of directions given to them ended up being very different than what they experienced, and they had to figure out how they were going to face this new challenge. And so what's fascinating about this is, again, what they set out to do and what they encountered. And let me read just the original instructions that they received from then President Thomas Jefferson. He writes, "To Captain Meriwether Lewis, the object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean may offer the most direct and practicable water communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce." Let me remix that. In other words, hey, find a way that we can take boats from the east side of this continent to the west side for the purposes of commerce, of shipping goods. Apparently, we have always been obsessed with the supply chain and how to fix it or make it better or improve upon it. But it was challenging back then. We got our own challenges today. Now, Lewis became Lewis and Clark, as we kind of know them as one joint package in terms of leading this thing. When Lewis reached out to his actually old commanding officer in the Army, Clark, because he knew he needed help. And even though Lewis's rank was higher than Clark's, he insisted on this shared leadership for this mission to be part of this core of discovery. And so they headed forth to the Rocky Mountains in their canoes, and they're heading down the Missouri, and they're making progress, and they know how to do what they're doing. And they hope to arrive at the Rockies and just find a water pathway and just kind of glide their way down to the Pacific Ocean. But instead of finding some gentle stream or river to carry them to the Pacific, what they found was mountain after mountain after mountain. They had no idea of the challenge that awaited them. And so that goes to the premise of this book, Canoeing the Mountains. How do you canoe a mountain? You don't. It's not possible. There was a challenge they faced, and they had to adapt to find a different way to navigate the terrain that they found. And so really, I bring that up because, man, this can feel a lot like church today. Some of us have been around a while. We remember kind of different eras, and we think of the church, and man, it feels like a completely different world today. Church used to be just a much more recognizable part of our culture, our society, even here in the Pacific Northwest, where its footprint and its impact maybe isn't as widespread as different parts of the nation in previous generations. But man, Sundays are no longer about honoring a Sabbath and setting aside time to pursue God with other families. Instead, it's more about Starbucks or the soccer field and the Seahawks games, maybe for like two of you who are still tracking with them. But anyways, right, it's so many things other than church. It's kind of like, hey, when church fits in, great, but we've got so much else going on. This just seems to be so commonplace in our culture and our world today. And there used to be a lot more influence that we would observe that we think Christianity had around the society around us. And so we can pine for those days. We can look back and say, oh, like we need to get back to that. And we can look at that, but really what some writers call Christendom, that's kind of the idea that I think we think of. What I mean by Christendom is this: the political or societal influence by the means of power that Christianity has had in parts of the Western world in different periods of time, from Constantine's Rome onward. And so we see a waning, we feel a lack of that influence and that impact. And so we don't know what should we do? And so Christians kind of fall into two camps really that aren't helpful. One is Christians, we can just kind of like have a very hangdog, like, well, what are we going to do about it? I don't know. And we can just bunker down, and we just kind of care about the few people who are in our lives, and we kind of have in essence given up on the world. There's another camp of Christians that get really belligerent, and it's kind of like, no, we need to take a stand, and we need to be against the culture, right? And we can buy into this narrative that if just this law would change, if just this individual was in power, out of power, or if this thing would happen in our culture, then everything would be back to normal. Everything would be right again. And the problem with that is that expression of faith looks a lot like being concerned with external power, external influence, and to change things again by taking control of the power of society to change people's lives. But I wonder if falling in love with having our hands on the levers of power in society and culture is actually part of our problem that is facing the church today. And obviously, I'm saying this because I believe it is. I believe that we actually live in a context that looks a lot more like Daniel's Babylon than it looks like Constantine's Rome. And so maybe you don't understand either of those contexts. I just want to give you a little bit of background or a refresher, a reminder about those two contexts that I just shared. So the first one, Daniel and Babylon. Daniel was a young man who was growing up in ancient Israel. And in 605 BC, he is taken away into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar, who conquers his people, and he takes them to Assyria. And Daniel serves there, and he distinguishes himself as a trustworthy, as a competent, and as a devout young man who serves very well in kind of the king's system of government. In fact, he serves not only King Nebuchadnezzar in Assyria, but he goes on to serve King Darius in Persia. And in this stretch, here's the thing. Daniel's faith is not popular. It is not what holds sway over the court and the people in power at the time. And yet Daniel and his friends choose to continue to worship God fully. They continue to be focused on honoring God and seeking Him no matter what it might cost them. And it puts their lives on the line, at least in a couple different times. And if you're unfamiliar with these stories, I would encourage you to go to the book of Daniel in what we call the Old Testament and just read those stories. There's power there of Daniel's example of how he lived in exile in Babylon. Conversely, sometimes we as Christians, we look at another moment in history. I mentioned Constantine's Rome. Emperor Constantine in the year 313 AD finally made Christianity an officially recognized religion in the Roman Empire. Many religions kind of got this status, but it was something that you wanted to get, this official religion status for Rome, because it meant you were legit. It meant that, again, you had access to more power and more influence for your group. And so Constantine finally does this after nearly 300 years of the church existing, and then it actually a decade later goes on to become the religion of the Roman Empire. And here's the thing, that is neither good nor bad in and of itself, but even if it seems at first glance like a kind of a triumph for Christianity, something begins to shift in the strength of the church in this moment in history. That in nearly 300 years where the church just isn't recognized by the Roman Empire, it still was able to be a powerful force for good, not only in the Roman Empire, but because often of the persecution, the church spread out and it reached so many more people. It continued to help so many more people than it had even prior. And so it didn't need this official status to continue to transform the world around it. And actually, when Christians got their hands on these worldly sources of power, it actually shifted the focus away from the mission, away from helping other people discover the new life that's found in Jesus, and it shifted subtly, maybe even unconsciously, to protecting positions of power and prestige and making sure that their position wasn't going to be threatened. Okay, now here's why I bring that up. I believe that we are in a cultural shift where, as Christians, the church, we are in a position much closer to Daniel's Babylon than we are to Constantine's Rome, whether we like it or not. Okay? We've got to recognize the terrain around us and realize that the church is not in this position of controlling the levers of power in society and being the dominant influence, and that's okay. That's actually okay because there's actually some, again, negative consequences that came when the church married itself to this Roman power, right? Because basically, big picture, here's what happens. Foremost, Christians began buying into this narrative that transformation primarily was something external. It was something that we could force upon society, we could force upon the world and upon others. And history is littered with bad examples of what happens when maybe sometimes well-intentioned, maybe not well-intentioned Christians do this. But again, that moment shifted, it pivoted. Oh, transformation is something that comes from external power rather than what the first generation and centuries of churches understood, that the transformation offered by Jesus is primarily internal. That's where the change comes from. That's as we learn to walk in the way of Jesus, as we learn to allow the Spirit to lead us to live differently, others take notice. And then the community of faith invites others to experience that, invites others to begin to follow and belong. That's the pathway originally that the church was walking on to experience transformation and radically changed the world without their hands on any lever of power in society. And I think we struggle with that legacy a bit that's handed down, this tension of we like power, we like being in charge, we don't like not having the influence. And that's a legacy that we need to wrestle with in our context. Because the reality is some of our most cherished stories of faith come from those exile moments. Those underdog moments, if you will, are some of the most powerful ways that God shows up. And so I think that happens so often when we have our hands on the power of the world and those sources and the influence of the world, it's easy to forget what our true identity is as Christians, who we're truly called to be. Because I believe when we discover, again, who we actually are, when we're reminded how we're actually called to interact with the world around us and who we're called to be, then we can begin to navigate those mountains in front of us rather than try to run into them with our canoes, right? Rather than use what we used in previous generations to try and navigate today's challenges, right? Yesterday's solutions are not going to be the answers to today's problems, but that's okay because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, as we read about in Hebrews, as Jesus is described that way, and so he can be trusted. And so what does Jesus actually then call us to do no matter what? Like what is the fixed, unchanging thing that we've got to know, that we've got to anchor ourselves to? And so I want to talk about these as two simple guideposts to guide how we interact with the world as the church. And so we talk about these a lot. These are nothing new. I'm going to talk about the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. So the first of those guideposts, the Great Commandment. I'm going to read in Matthew 22, picking up in verse 36. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. And so we talk about what it looks like to love and to pursue God when we read that. Often it's a simple statement, right? We can gloss over that. We can just read it and just move on. But man, that is a well to draw from that transforms the habits that I engage with. It transforms the way I think. It changes the way I interact with my neighbor who's different than me. Man, that great commandment is a guidepost that drives our behavior and drives how I interact with others. And so that's kind of the first one that's unchanging. That never changes, and we gotta maintain focus as that is part of our mission. But the second piece really kind of fleshes out what that looks like. That second guidepost is what I said earlier is the Great Commission. Think about that word actually with a hyphen in it, co-mission. That we somehow get to participate with God in accomplishing His unique plan and purpose in our world, but only if we choose to participate with Him in it. And so what is this mission exactly that Jesus inaugurates and invites any and all of us to take part in? Let me read these words again. They might be familiar for some, but read these anew with fresh eyes. In Matthew 28, beginning verse 18, we read, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age.'" And so thinking about, again, the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, these guideposts to guide us, that really there are, though, two modes or two contexts in which the church operates. And each one of these guideposts maybe speak to one of the two of these. First of all, the first mode that the church operates in is it gathers. We gather for worship. We gather for community. It's vital. It's just what we do as Christians. But then the second mode, the second way the church operates is that the church goes. The church is sent out to accomplish the mission that God has given us. That guidepost that's fixed, it doesn't change. Our mission is about making disciples and to help others discover the hope, the purpose, the new life that comes from beginning to follow Jesus, to walk in the ways of Jesus, to experience a radically different and better life, an eternal life ultimately. And so that's what being a disciple is all about, being a follower of Jesus. Now, here's the challenge, looking at those two guideposts and the nature of the church as being gathered, but then the church also is sent out. As Christians, especially as we even mature in the faith, we are predominantly concerned with the gathered expression of being the church. When we're together, that predominates our concern, our focus about church. That really, we feel great when the room is full, when it's filled up with people. And we feel not so great when there's less people there. And then if it's less full for a long time, we start to get itchy. We might panic. We might be like, somebody do something. Like, what is going on? And we get a little nervous. And then we might shift to maybe blame the culture, right? Well, it's winter, it's gray. People don't want to get up. And then it's summertime here in the Pacific Northwest. Oh, well, it's sunny out, so maybe people will be back in mid-September. Oh, well, the Seahawks are playing. Again, that's not an excuse this season. Like that, you can't use that one. But we can go on and on with like reasons maybe why we think the gathered expression just isn't what we want it to be, or maybe it wasn't what it once was. And so what do we do about it? And so we can grasp at quick fixes that, certainly there's just one or two small tweaks that we need to make, and then everything is going to be back to normal. That we just need program X, or we need our worship to look a little bit more like this, or if you would just preach this way, then all of the problems would be solved, okay? And so we've got to be a people, as we're on this journey, we're navigating, like I said, it's like we're in an era where we were canoeing the rivers, and now we're faced with mountains. And so we've got to understand what's really going on. And what we need to know, the reality is that pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, about 85% of churches were either in a state of decline or plateau or flatline. And so you might be like, okay, well, some churches are declining, but at least some are holding steady. That's good, right? The problem is many of those plateaued, stuck churches are communities that are growing, that people are being added to these cities and these towns, and the church is not keeping pace. And so we have to face the reality that our gathered experiences of church have something to say about our sent nature of being the church. We have a going out problem, not so much a gathered problem, I believe. But we want to fixate all of our time and focus and energy around the gathered experience. And again, that's like navigating the rivers when you got mountains in front of you. You can't continue to do that. We've got to recapture the sense of being the people of God who are on mission with Jesus in the world around us. And so how do we adapt? How do we adapt to face an uncharted world with all sorts of challenges and problems that we've never had to deal with before? How do we do that? Well, the good news is that simply we recommit to the mission, the original purpose. Just like when Lewis and Clark set out, right? They didn't find that waterway that they thought was going to be easy. But their mission was to be the core of discovery. They still made it to the Pacific Ocean. Their discoveries enabled so much to happen. And so, again, we've got to return to what is truly the essence, the core of our mission. And again, in that Matthew 28 passage that we just read, that Great Commission passage that's so key, that first part of the statement looks like this: go into the world. And so we view that as like a command. Go, right? And there's an aspect to that, but here's what you need to know about that word, go. In the original Greek, it is not a main verb. It's actually a participle, and not only that, it's a passive participle. And so I want to read it as if that's true, because it is. That's how it's written. And so what if we read the beginning of the Great Commission more like this? As you are going about, make disciples. As you are going about, make disciples. Because making disciples, that's the main verb. That's the guidepost. That's the mission. That never changes. That's what the church does. We help people begin to walk with Jesus and continue to walk with Jesus. That's it. That's what we do. That's fixed. But how do we see that happen? How do we actually help people come to know and begin to follow? Well, it actually starts with us by going, but just wherever we are. Beginning wherever we're at. That's where we can all start. That we don't have to cross an ocean or a time zone or even necessarily send another missionary, even though that is a great thing to do. But if we're going to face the mountains in front of us right here in Pierce County, we've got to recapture the sense that it is by going, each and every one of us going about our everyday lives. That's how the mission is going to be accomplished. That's how we're going to scale these mountains in front of us. And so what does that by going look like? Right, you can look back at our Blessed series last year in 2021, right? But some of these practices, this is how we do this by going thing, by praying for those opportunities each day to share in relationships where we can, again, have the opportunity to share our story and be heard and earn that right to do that. By just simply looking to start conversations with our unchurched neighbors. Again, your neighbor being literally the person on your block or on your floor, but that teammate, that coworker, that classmate. We look for opportunities to build those relationships, to take the time to look to care about others, to love others outside of the church, and to seek to serve them in whatever ways that we are able to. Again, I love this quote that I came across recently. It says, if Western societies have become post-Christian mission fields, how can traditional churches then become missionary churches? Not churches that send out a bunch of missionaries, but churches where everybody owns the mission. Everybody who's committed to following Jesus knows that it's their responsibility to do. And the irony is, if we view ourselves that way, that we are being sent out every week, if we seek to reach those who maybe stepped away from faith, or they're skeptical, or they've been hurt, or they have questions, and if we seek to care about them and truly care about them and love them and have a relationship with them, again, we're going to end up inviting them eventually at some point to participate, to share in what is so vital to us. And then here's the thing. If we care, if we invite, guess what? The room tends to fill up when the people of God in a local church are all on board with carrying out the mission, rather than thinking that's somebody else's job. That's what we pay you for. I don't have to do that. And we've got to reclaim this mission is for all of us if we're going to scale the mountains before us. And here's the thing. Even if the room doesn't get fuller, that's okay. Accomplishing the mission is all that matters. It's all that matters. Are we really reaching new people and allowing them to experience a hope that they don't currently have in Jesus? Or are we just simply okay with church transfer growth? Like, we're cool with other Christians coming who already know the rules and they fit in nicely, and we don't have to work really hard to accommodate that, but we feel better because there's more bodies in the room, okay? We cannot have that mindset. Again, are we seeing people's lives transformed, or are we just focused on, like, is the singing good enough for me in the room on Sundays? Are we really willing to rediscover the call that it is by going in our simple, ordinary, everyday lives with simple, ordinary actions that we can carry out this mission, that we can truly transform Pierce County? Now, you're saying, okay, but that sounds normal, right? Like maybe I need to recommit to that, but that doesn't sound radical. Like, what are there any new steps that we need to take? Like, what are these new challenges? And so, again, one of those that we've committed to scaling in our context as a church is reaching people digitally, stepping into the digital space and doing ministry there. And really, it's our desire to equip you, to resource you through that digital ministry to be able to share and reach others. Because we take the extra time every week. We've reoriented our staffing in order to put digital resources in your hands, but not for you. What do I mean by that? Not for you. Here's the thing, right? We shifted at the beginning of the pandemic, just like everybody did. We moved everything online so that we could be together. We made that pivot for us to still gather. And that was a good thing. It was so vital and important, especially in those early days, to have some normalcy, to still gather, even though it was radically different, to still worship and to hear from God's word and learn from it, and to take communion and to do all those things. But that's not what we're doing digital for moving forward into the future. Digital is primarily for those who are not yet here with us. That's why we're investing ministry in this space. And so that's why we take the time to create and craft messages like this that you can share proudly, that we take the time to make it conversational, that we want it to be accessible to a broad category of people, a broad audience, and that they can get to know us before they would ever consider stepping foot into a church building. And here's the thing, it is working. Okay, we have heard stories of people joining us, and I love seeing new people in the lobby and just saying, hey, how did you hear about Rainier View, or how did you come in? And increasingly, we're hearing news stories of people saying, I've been watching you guys for months, and I felt comfortable joining you. I felt like this might be a place that I could belong with, or that there's things that you're sharing that really resonated with me, and I'm ready to take a step and join you live. In fact, we had one individual who was out of state, and her adult children moved into the area recently, and she found us online from out of state, halfway across the country, found us, showed up live on a Sunday and said, this is great, I'm going to bring my kids with me next week. And so again, here's the thing. Ministry in a digital space, this is completely uncharted. Like, there's no roadmap, there's no guide, there's no like, hey, here's how you do this. And so it can be scary, it can be challenging, and I have a very sad prediction. I think because it's uncharted, most Christians are just going to go back, most churches are just going to go back to what they did pre-pandemic. We'll put a link to a sermon audio on our website because we're going to be fixated only on the gathered expression of church. And that is vitally important. That is essential and foundational to who we are. But we cannot let that get in the way of accomplishing the mission, of scaling the mountain, saying, how can we take these resources into a digital space? How can we as a staff put great resources and tools in your hands so that it helps you live on mission well? Helps you be the sent expression of the church. The mission's too important for us to go backwards. And so because, right, our vision as a church is we want to see every neighborhood in Pierce County engaged by believers to be transformed by Jesus. It's a big, daunting task. It's going to be bigger than ourselves, but a key part in scaling that, in facing that challenge, that's going to look like us having to continue to experiment and refine and figure out the best ways for you to begin conversations with people. And that's going to begin with an invite to maybe check something out digitally. It's going to begin by people who are skeptical about church and about faith, and they got questions, to be able to meet us in a safe digital space first, to interact with us when they're risking nothing before they're ever going to take a step in real life. And so what about us? What about everybody at Rainier View? If you're joining us, you're part of our church family. What does it mean for you? And so I would just say, focus on one of those aspects of the church, either the gathered nature or the sent nature of the church. What might be your next step? Maybe for some of us, we just need to recommit to being part of the gathered experience of the church. That if we're honest, we just like having the extra time back on the weekends. We like feeling like I got credit for watching church, but I didn't have to go, right? And again, I get that. I understand the tensions and the demands on our time. But man, the community is what shapes us in church. There's something profound that happens when we gather for worship, when we gather and commit ourselves to community with one another that can't be short-circuited, that can't be done without. And so maybe your step is to recommit to the gathered expression of the church this year. For others of us, maybe it's a commitment to being that sent aspect of the church. That if we're honest, we haven't been on mission. The church primarily has been about getting my own needs met. It's been about maybe just even keeping the status quo. Okay, and we get it. Mountains are scary if you've just been canoeing in a river and you've never climbed one, right? But would you be willing to just look, what is the small step that I can take to be sent out each week, to intentionally live on mission? And so wherever you are, take one step towards recommitting to being part of that gathered aspect of the church, or recommit to being a person who sees himself being sent out every week on mission to reach Pierce County with the hope and the good news of Jesus. Hey, thank you so much, and we look forward to have you joining us next week as we begin a brand new series on shame.
Thanks so much for watching the message here today on RVCC Online. But don't click off quite yet. If you haven't already, I personally invite you to head out to our social media accounts, both on Instagram and on Facebook at Rainier View CC. Go ahead and like and follow there. Throughout the week, we post things that have relations to the current message. We have event information and just some overall great discipleship tools that I really want you to be a part of throughout the week to help you in your walk with Jesus. Also, if you go out to our YouTube channel, just search Rainier View Christian Church. You can find all previous messages, including this one. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button in order to support us. And also, if this message did resonate with you today, or a previous message did, and you can think of somebody that this would benefit, I invite you to go ahead and share the message with somebody out there today. Also, if you haven't filled out the digital connection card, please do so at rainierview.org/online. That is just a great way, again, for us to connect with you. You can put in prayer requests, and I personally would love to talk with you. Or hey, if you just want to connect with one of us here on staff, you can personally email me anytime at crystalc@rainierview.org. And I would love, love, love to do life with you and chat with you. Maybe we can even do coffee if you're in the area. Again, thanks so much for being a part of Rainier View, and we'll see you soon.